Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we're speaking with Steph Alinsug, Media Steward at Seed Club. We'll be chatting about all things media, what is decentralized or Web3 media, and we'll finish this conversation with some of Steph's thoughts on relationship building in DAOs. But before we dive into our conversation with Steph, here's a quick word from the Web3 projects that help make the season possible.
Web2 Social has become a world of walled gardens, where platforms own your data, your content, and your community. But Lent Protocol is a community garden, a user-owned, composable, and decentralized ecosystem designed to let Web3 social apps bloom. When you create content on Lens, you own it, you control it, you take it with you from app to app, and you decide how it's monetized. Instead of chasing ads and algorithms, you set the value of your work, and your community collects it directly from you. Here at Rehash, we'll be experimenting with this ourselves by posting all content from Season 3 on Lens, where our community can now truly interact and grow with us. So bring your photos and videos, your GMs, and your friends, and come join the new era of social media on Lens Protocol. Go to claim.lens.xyz to claim the last social media handle you'll ever need. And be sure to follow rehash.lens.
Contributing to a DAO can feel like this. Contributing to several DAOs can feel like this. But it doesn't have to. With Avenue, you can filter out the noise, get to know more DAOs, and start contributing right away. Avenue allows contributors to form organic teams to work together on the things they love. This means DAOs can operate, coordinate, and collaborate at a scale that used to be impossible. Because working together in a DAO should be like making music. The drummers drum, the singers sing, and when collaboration leads the way, a song emerges. No more relying on the core team to get things done. It's time to get your community contributing. To give your DAO the information they need to know, the tools they need to self-organize, and the spaces they need to work together, visit avenue.place.
Hey guys, thanks for hopping on here. I just wanted to touch base real quick.
What's up, Diane?
What's up? So first of all, I just wanted to say thanks, Tyler, for taking these meeting notes. They look great.
I didn't take those. I'll take credit for it, though.
Wait, that wasn't you? Do we know who it was? And who's been posting those hilarious meme videos on our Twitter?
Oh, I have no idea. There's a lot going on here, though. Like, how are we supposed to keep up with what everyone's doing?
I don't know. It feels like pure chaos being in a DAO sometimes. Ellie, what was that thing you were talking about that helps DAO contributors add and organize all of their contributions?
Oh yeah, it's called Govern. It's like GitHub for DAO contributors.
Ooh, that sounds cool. How does it actually work?
Yeah, so it's actually a protocol where DAO members can add any task they've completed as a contribution. And then their fellow DAO members can attest to them to confirm that those contributions were valid without the need for a core team to do so. What you end up with is a simple bottom-up way for members to build out the DAO's contribution graph themselves. It gives contributors more power and freedom, it makes it a lot easier to accurately reward everyone. DAO members actually own all of their contributions, so if they want to jump into another DAO, they can actually prove they know their stuff.
Okay, I'm sold. Can it be on chain?
Of course, but on Gnosis chain, so transactions are super cheap.
Ooh. All right, yeah, I'm down. Diane?
Yeah, for sure. Let's set it up. What's the link, Ellie?
Just go to govern.app, and that's govern without the E, so GOVRN.app.
Perfect. All right, well, if you guys got this, I gotta jump back to another call. Hey, Steph, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hey, Diana. I am so good.
Great. I'm so excited to have you here. I feel like this was a long time coming, and I'm so glad to finally have the opportunity as somebody who's also super big on decentralized media, which has sort of become this buzzword that nobody really knows what it means. I am really stoked to have the opportunity to chat with you and get all of your thoughts on what that means to you. But before we dive into all of that, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, isn't familiar with you, which, by the way, you're Crypto Honey on Twitter. People might know you better as Crypto Honey than as Steph. But can you tell people a little bit about your background and how you initially became interested in decentralized media?
Totally. So I onboarded to crypto about a year ago. It's wild to think how much has changed in a year. I compare crypto timelines to the lifespan of a dog and how you like determine a dog's age in dog years. That like 1 year in crypto is like 7 years in like physical world time. So much has happened since I onboarded. But yeah, prior to onboarding to Web3, I was running my own like boutique branding studio and have spent all of my life, but then specifically my career, thinking about brands, thinking about storytelling. And then I've also had a sort of parallel life as a community organizer, specifically at the intersection of racial and social justice. So have a lot of overlap with cooperative movements and sort of like decentralized decision making and flat structures. And throughout my professional career was always looking for a way that I could fuse those two worlds. So I sort of discovered that when I was running my studio. I was working mostly with social impact brands, so like think tanks and grassroots orgs and nonprofits. And the sort of problem with that is there's just like not a lot of money to be made, right? That it's like you're working with nonprofit budgets or you're working with organizations that are, grant funded. And so things are pretty scrappy. And I was always very happy to do that, but I have a full family and a life. And I just was interested in like, okay, what's sort of the next layer here? And like, what's sort of the next layer of innovation? And I listened to an episode, the A16Z episode on NFTs that came out last year. They recently did another re-up on that episode, but I'm talking specifically about the original one. And in that episode, they talk about community tokens and DAOs. And I think at the time they were still calling these things social tokens. And when they talked about DAOs in this episode, I had immediate legibility. I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like something I was attempting to do in my community organizing days, like pre-Web3. And yeah, and so it's just like, oh, like what's going on Twitter? Like, let me get on Twitter and see what's up. And yeah, I mean, fast forward a year and here we are.
Yeah, so a year ago, the conversation around decentralized media hadn't exactly taken off just yet. So at what point did you realize like, oh, there's something here, the media landscape is shifting and there's opportunity for so much more?
Yeah, so I joined Seed Club in February of this year as a part-time contributor, and at the time was sort of housed under the community working group. And there was just like an interest in creating content. I'm like, okay, we need some content. Like, there's some overlap here with Twitter, and content creation and social media management at the intersection of brand building was something that I was like a service I offered in my studio. So it was something I could do pretty easily, even though I had made a promise to myself at the beginning of this year that I was never going to manage a client's social media account ever again. Any social media manager can relate, I'm sure. And kind of just like taking on this pretty small chunk of scope and also like dipping my toes in a couple of other DAOs too, I realized that the thing that people were hungry for was content, but there was also this like sort of next layer out conversation that people weren't having or putting a name to. And I was like, this isn't just content marketing. This isn't just like posting to social media. Like, oh no, this is content and storytelling at the intersection of community building, at the intersection of finding your people and utilizing storytelling as a way to align incentives. And once I started thinking about it in that way, it just like unlocked all of these sort of threads I was pulling on in my Web 2 experience of branding, which pre-Web 3, the way that I always approached branding was, who can people be in this community? And how are we going to tell those people that that's who they can be here? Like, how are we going to find those people? And so it really was always at the intersection of like identity and creating the conditions for folks to come be those people within the brand. And yeah, and like that has like a ton of surface area with DAOs. And yeah, and it goes way beyond just content and physical packaging design or like web design. It goes way beyond that. And so yeah, media was what I just started naturally calling it. And I was like, what is media? It's storytelling. What does it do? It also encompasses, what we previously called marketing, branding, and at the same time, like your editorial and your social and your publicity. It kind of encompasses all of those things. Yeah. And so it was something that just like kind of emerged. And it's fascinating to see the way in which the space has now focused so much on decentralized media.
Yeah, I like that broad interpretation of media. And I tend to agree with that too. I think it's so much more than just the mediums that people think of, like written content, video content, all of those things. It's really about telling a story, telling a narrative, communicating an idea. That's really what it is to me. So when you think back to when you used to do, a lot of branding and a lot of like media work for your clients in the Web2 space versus now thinking so much about decentralized media in Web3, what do you see as being some of the biggest differences between Web2 media and Web3 media?
Oh, totally. This is the core question, right? I also want to just underline that distinction that you pulled out there, that people are often like, what is decentralized media? Or when I say media, people, they have all kinds of answers for what they think media is. And I think there's a critical distinction between media as an output. So like content or JPEGs or video. And then there's media as a discipline. And media as a discipline is sort of the realm that I'm most interested in. And obviously those two things relate, but I feel like it's a critical distinction. And so, yeah, the differences between media and Web2 and Web3. So I'm going to pull apart media and Web2, and I'm going to call it marketing and branding just for the sake of this. And in Web3 in particular, I'm interested in media at the intersection of DAOs and community ownership and community co-creation. In Web2 and pre-Web3 days, your marketing and your branding, the end state was basically customer acquisition. The whole game was basically to, acquire a customer. And that's true even for a nonprofit or a grassroots orgs, right? That the goal is to get the person into the ecosystem, to do email capture, to have them show up to something, to have them sign a petition, to engage in a direct action. And then, of course, more traditional, like, to buy the thing or to subscribe to the thing. And so it's really this like one directional passive consumption thing. And in Web3, particularly at the intersection of DAOs, and I'm actually going to really focus in on DAOs here, the media is way more bidirectional and it's way more responsive. And to say that like media and branding and marketing in Web2 is also responsive, right? That you basically iterate and you do A/B testing and you respond in that way, but it's more responsive in Web3 or in the intersection of DAOs in that the people who come into your community as a result of your media then engage in the act of then telling the story. And again, if you think about in Web2 and marketing or branding, you're trying to just like communicate the story that you want to be told to then get the customer that you want. And in Web3 and in DAOs, that is more emergent, it's more bidirectional, more co-created.
Yeah. And just to clarify too, when we say decentralized media and then Web3 media, we're using these synonymously, right?
Yeah, totally. I think, I would love to pull on that a little bit more because I think there's Web3 media, there's decentralized media, there's media and DAOs. And I think, we are using them synonymously here. And I also think that there are critical distinctions. I don't know if it's useful to go into them right now because it could be a rabbit hole, but
I'd be curious to hear your sort of just like high level take on what those distinctions are between the three.
Yeah, I'll just say like, this is the first time I'm trying on how to differentiate between them all, but I'll start with media at the intersection of DAOs because that's the piece that does feel really distinct. And yeah, when I talk about media at the intersection of DAOs, I do think about media here as a discipline, but that then also informs a set of outputs. So, just speaking about Seed Club, our media as a discipline is split up into 4 different work streams: editorial, brand, social and publicity, and productions. And within that, we have specific like media outputs. So we've got, visual assets, the actual brand identity. We've got the podcast, we're working on video. We've got newsletters. We've got tweets, all of those like actual micro pieces of content or micro pieces of media output. And media within a DAO is, again, this sort of like new form of storytelling, of engaging in like narrative building and engaging in point of view building that is co-created and that is really emergent depending on who's in the room at any given point and how that might change over time. And how you're also communicating to folks like, yeah, come here and do this thing here. Like this is sort of the quote unquote call to adventure that we talk about at Seed Club a lot. And like, come here and then come co-create this adventure with us. And that story, that thing that might emerge and shift and change slightly over time, depending on who's there. And especially also as the space changes. And then decentralized media, I don't know, there's probably some like juicy, like concentric circle graphic here that's emerging. But yeah, decentralized media is, there's in Web 2 and pre-Web 3, like media is highly centralized, right? We know this. Most of the media companies and media producers are owned by larger holding companies, and there's just like constant consolidation. And it can also be very challenging to break into a more established, like sort of blue chip media company. And so decentralized media, and then specifically at the intersection of Web 3, is this idea that there's many layers and many points of entry to participating in a media ecosystem, that like there's like decentralized distribution, there's decentralized curation, and there's decentralized creation, and that there's many sort of points of entry there. And then Web3 media in particular, that is where I think we often see folks sort of amplifying and emphasizing the specific outputs of media. So we see folks focused on like NFTs, you know, because yes, that is Web3 media. Like an NFT is a piece of media. Yeah. And so that's like kind of what I would try on around how to distinguish between those three.
I like that. Yeah. So I think when I think about this topic, or what we've been talking about so far, has more been focused on decentralized media or media in DAOs, those two pieces, probably more so than Web3 media more generally, as you've just defined the three. Something that you just said with decentralized media is that there's these three tiers. There's the content creation, there's the curation, and then distribution. And that's something that I want to dive into a little bit more. You know, you've already alluded to that a little bit in the things that you've said, but one thing that you keep saying over and over again, I see you saying this on Twitter, and I think you have some blog posts on it as well, is that decentralized media is not decentralized content creation. That is just one piece of decentralized media. Can you talk a little bit more about that, just more explicitly, like what you mean by that? Because I think this is a common misconception that people have, is when they hear decentralized media, they automatically just think decentralized content creation. And then they think, how the heck can we ever do this? You know, like in theory, it's great. Let's just let everybody have a voice and let's let everybody contribute to this publication with their content. But in practice, you know, that's not going to make a very high quality publication that people are going to want to read. So can you just talk more explicitly about what you mean by that and what those other pieces of decentralized media are and why those are equally as important?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote that piece, I think it was over the summer, and I've been so curious about the sort of like longevity or lifespan of that, and how we also might continue to complicate that as we sort of mature and emerge as a space. But I still think that the sort of like core tenets feel relevant. So I wrote the piece sort of in response to watching some peers of mine in the space were like actively in this like anxiety around the like move to immediately decentralize the creation process. And my peers were actively like experiencing the challenges of that. And I think the quality dilution piece is like the primary one, but it's also like a capacity thing too, right? That like, if you're relying explicitly on decentralized creation, like either you've got some sort of like exclusively permissionless contribution setup, which has its own whole set of challenges to deal with, or you're like doing some sort of high touch or medium touch, like curation or editing. And that just like requires way more human power and human capacity. And also like, you know, if you're engaging in decentralized content creation, there's like one of two assumptions. One is that you have strong enough or legible enough brand guardrails in place that folks will be able to create media, whatever it is, that's aligned with those guardrails, or that you're just like so ready for the sort of like fungibility of those core tenants or brand tenants that you're just like willing to trust that whoever's there is going to like sort of proliferate whatever this emerging thing is. So going right to decentralized content creations is like a very risk-full thing to do. And it's also incredible, right? Like there's a lot of reasons why folks would do that. But then, right, there's these two other pieces that are equally as important and equally as like juicy and creative. I'm going to jump out to distribution first, because that's like the space that's the most easily tapped into is decentralized distribution. And that's literally the recognition that everyone in your community, everyone in your Discord is a distribution point and also a storyteller of your POV. I reference Boys Club a lot when I talk about decentralized distribution, because anytime they publish a newsletter, which is once a week, or anytime they come out with a podcast episode, which is also, I think, weekly right now, my Twitter timeline just like blows up with people from Boys Club that are in Boys Club talking about this media, right? They're just like proliferating the like, yeah, that like the podcast episode just dropped, or the newsletter, this and that. And not only are they distributing the content, but they're also adding in their specific point of view about like what stood out to them or what resonated with them. And so in that way, they're becoming a part of the storytelling of the Boys Club community. And so that's just like such a beautiful way to engage in the community building process. And then if you go the next layer in, so curation, and curation is actually the place that I'm most excited about in decentralized media, because there's a sense of more community participation in your media, in the building of your community, while also still folks are able to leverage the brand or the social proof of whatever the DAO is. But then, there's still this like precious core of creation that you can maintain. And so you still have an opportunity to continue to like refine your story through the creation. But again, like curation. So I point to Forefront's newsletter often, and they also are testing out this new product called On Pulse, and Rafa's Folklore, which is another project that I think actually engages in this three concentric circle thing really well and just like naturally does it. But curation, so if you look at Forefront's newsletter as one example, there's just a channel in the Discord where anyone can go and drop links that they find inspiring from the space. And there's still someone from the Forefront team who is going through and identifying which links are the most interesting and then sends it out as a newsletter. And what that does is it grants community participation in the building of this, brand's POV. And also there's still a sense of being able to align the community's POV with the brand's POV via the like person at Forefront who's actually selecting which links feel like they are most resonant with the Forefront brand. And then, their new product On Pulse, it's like a Web3 version of Arena. And that's another way to like integrate community co-creation at the intersection of curation. Yeah. And I mean, does it make sense to talk about like folklore or to take a breath a little bit?
Yeah, no, go for it. I was just chatting with Rafa about getting on a call with him to learn more about folklore because I haven't dug into it as deeply as I should have. So please, I would love to hear more about folklore.
Yeah. So I'm a big Folklore fanboy and also just like a Rafa fanboy. But so Rafa the Builder on Twitter launched this community, which is currently like patchworked together through a few different apps, right? So he wrote this piece on Mirror that was like, we're going to try this sort of community building thing at the intersection of lore and community building and linking up the sort of like textures of this phase of human evolution with like what it is the felt experience to be human and how that all sort of crashes into one another in Web3. And so if you minted that first piece on Mirror, that basically got you a Folklore token that then got you access to a token-gated Telegram chat. So you'd have to go through Guild and verify, and then got you access to a token-gated Telegram chat. And there's actually two Telegram chats. There's a public one that's called the Folklore Drip, where Rafa drops all the articles that he's curating. So anyone can go and see what the articles are and can read them. And then there's the Folklore Forum, where that's a token-gated component where folks can then go in and actually engage in the discussion around the specific articles that Rafa at that point in time was still curating. So that's like a really interesting way of slow starting your community around a specific idea. But then more recently, he has put Folklore on Pulse on this Forefront product, where now anyone who holds a token can go and curate articles themselves on Pulse. And there's also discussion built in on Pulse too. So it started with Rafa as like sort of the primary curator, but he also opened up distribution. Like anybody could view the articles and like could tweet like, read this beautiful thing curated by a Folklore. Now the community can participate in curation. And the next phase is Rafa's going to start opening up actual like co-creation and of like writing specific things for Folklore. So I just see that as like a really beautiful primitive for what's possible when people can come together around a shared idea and how you can utilize these like various stages of decentralized media to like slow roll out a decentralized media community.
I love that. That's so cool. I'm really curious to see how it plays out. That's something that I've like thought a lot about too. And I think I definitely agree with what you're saying about the creation versus curation piece, where the creation piece can be sort of open to everybody. Like the way I think about, for example, if we take a publication and we're talking about written content, you can have everybody in the community submit content that they want to write, about things that they think are important. But then you have a layer on top of that of curators who evaluate that content, look over that content, and then select which ones to actually publish in the publication. And in that way, you're taking a more decentralized approach. It might not be a fully decentralized approach, but a more decentralized approach than what we have seen in the past with media, and having an opportunity to include more voices and more perspectives in your publication while still maintaining that quality piece a little bit with that level, that medium level of curators. So yeah, I'm bullish on that model, and I'm really curious to see how it plays out with Folklore, especially because I don't think we've seen too many real world examples of that yet. And so there's always like a gap between what sounds good in theory and what actually works in practice. And so this is something though that I hope works in practice as well as it sounds like it will in theory.
Totally. I'm so excited for just more experiments like that. And I think too, there's another component. If we think about the possibilities of decentralized media within Web3 and crypto, and specifically at the intersection of tokens, that, I think that there's a way in which we want to port over the subscription model onto decentralized media in Web3. And like, to me, I'm like, yeah, that's like kind of interesting. Like now you can like engage in some, more interesting recurring revenue options. There's also like visible social proof about when you sort of started supporting that media entity, whether it's a publication, whether it's Folklore. There's also the ability to then have these like compounding effects for, collecting tokens at the intersection of individual pieces of content. And I think the thing that's actually the most interesting is how we then engage ownership at this level, especially how we support ownership for the people who are creating the work and creating the content, creating the media. So I think about podcast networks, pre-Web3 in particular. I mean, I guess this is really relevant for you too. But, if you think about like a Vox Media podcast network or like Gimlet, for instance, like there are podcasts that come out of that media network that are not hosted by the folks who are like the sort of faces of that media network. And yet like those people who are basically creating content for, Gimlet or for Vox, they're, of course they're being compensated and they're building their platform. And that's a really, important part of their journey as media people, but they don't actually have ownership in that brand. They don't have ownership in the, decision-making or the governance, but then also aren't able to retain the persistent brand value that's created, that they're actually doing the work of creating. And, so we talk a lot about the like sort of ills of social networks in Web 2 and how we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we're like working for Elon for free now, or some of us are actually paying Elon to work for him if you're a Twitter Blue member like I am, or if you have a blue check mark now, you're, $8 a month just to work for Elon. And how like, one of the most exciting things in Web 3 is for us to then have ownership in these networks, right? And so I think about that, the intersection of media networks too, that when you have people who are creating media for these networks, like imagine if we could grant them not just with like tokens or collectibles or like, token enabled subscriptions, but with actual ownership, especially at the intersection of the creators. So that's another piece that I'm so excited to see more experiments around.
That is super exciting. And like you said, is super applicable to us at Rehash. And something we've thought about too is as we're growing, we want to become on, the one side of Rehash, a production house of sorts that helps other creators spin up their own projects. And that could be other podcasts, or it could be a newsletter. It could be whatever people think will be valuable to the community at large. So it's exciting stuff because everything's so new. There's no playbook. Everything's like very experimental, but there's so much possibility that keeps people hopeful and encourages people to try new things and experiment. Something I was going to ask too is, now that we've talked about decentralized media, one thing I'm curious about is, what does that progressive decentralization of media look like? So I think Seed Club is probably one example of an organization that had a bit more centralized media to begin with, but is now thinking about how do we decentralize our media function at our organization. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what progressive decentralization of media looks like. And, feel free to share too, like how Seed Club is thinking about this, to use it as an example.
Totally. I mean, I think the question of how do you decentralize media, to your point about there's no playbooks currently, it really depends on the context of your specific organization, of your DAO. It depends on just like what is the thing that you're actually trying to do? And actually, we're in the thick of our 5th accelerator cohort right now. And And there's a couple cohort members and cohort projects that I'm like, wayfinding with or advising in particular, and at the intersection of decentralized media. And interestingly enough, I'm like trying to encourage the sort of like founding team members to actually go out and find the contributors who are hungry to co-create media with you. And that's actually, that's a slightly different twist on what I was like saying earlier around this idea of like keeping creation close and then curation and then distribution. And I think this is in particularly, when you're kickstarting a media effort, and especially when you're kickstarting a media effort at the intersection of a DAO. And that like, who are the people who are there, who are already contributing and dedicating their minds and hearts to this work? And how can you sort of engage that brilliance, especially if they have that interest right then and there? And how can you bring them in early to help kickstart that media effort? Because one of the things that we see so much, and I'm sure you can relate to this too as a, media person, like capacity to create consistently and to publish and distribute, gosh, it's like that is the real unlock. Like once you find yourself in that rhythm, that flywheel of creation, that's just such an unlock. But it really takes a lot to get there. It's like a lot of initial startup effort. And so I've been encouraging our early stage teams to be like, look around you. Like, is there a way in which you don't have to carry all of this and that you can bring in trusted contributors early on to help support the creation of these things? So that's just like a slight twist on this idea of like, keeping creation closed and opening up distribution and then curation. It's a slight twist, but like still relates to that idea. And then, so how we're thinking about it at Seed Club, we're actually in the process of incubating a new media initiative that we sort of kicked off the working group for this quarter. I'm super excited about. I can't share too much more about it, but we're excited to see how this could be a sort of like model for decentralizing media and how that could look. And just like kind of a fun experiment, both at the intersection of decentralized media, but then also at the intersection of how do we maintain editorial and like sort of brand quality? How do we effectively enable ownership in a network? And then how do we also sort of reclaim our experience of the internet and of social networks? Like how do we have spaces of like actually high insight curation? Because, currently you go to Twitter and any like the like sort of recommended content, and it's really like totally NGMI. And how can we sort of reclaim that experience within the confines of a really values aligned media network or publication? So we're really excited to explore that. But then, in terms of how we're thinking about decentralized media at Seed Club, we're actually in like the thick of experimenting with the working group and how we can like start with these like really small moments of decentralization that can then fractal out. So the media team, there's 4 of us on it, and I'm media steward, and we used to run like a really sort of traditional working group structure where, we'd meet once a week and the 4 of us would meet together. We'd sort of align on what work we need to do, and then we'd go from there. But we've recently, in order for me to go and pursue and pull together the working group for this new media initiative, made the decision that I would no longer attend the media weekly meetings. And so that space is now fully for the contributors, for the working group members. What happens when the 3 of them are together and like my presence isn't there? Like, have we actually set up, meaningful enough rails that they feel like they are then able to go and facilitate and execute on this media strategy? And I know that that's like not the most sexy or exciting like example of what does it mean to have a decentralized media strategy. What does it look like? But I'm actually like, no, that's the whole point. Like, we're going to start it with these 4 people, with the 4 of us. I'm going to back away from these meetings. Like, obviously I still have one-to-ones with team members and working group members. And yet like, y'all know what the strategy is. Y'all know what the objectives are. Like, you can decide on how it happens. And so I think that that's actually a really beautiful example of progressive decentralization. And the other piece I point to often is there's this really great interview with Rob McElvaney from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He was on Web3 with A16Z, and he's talking about his new project called the Atom Project, where he takes cues from writers' rooms in pre-Web3 as a way in which, you might be able to create this like continued like fractalization of decentralized creation and decentralized media, where in a writer's room, you typically have someone who's like sort of show running, and you have a bunch, writers who are like throwing ideas out, and the showrunner is like, that's a good idea. That's, not that idea. Like, okay, let's build on that thing. And that's sort of how these stories come together at the intersection of television writing. But then within these writers' rooms, a like sort of junior showrunner just like naturally emerges. And typically in Web 2 or pre-Web 3, it's really challenging to move your way into this show running position. But with Rob McElvaney's project, the Atomverse, he's looking at this idea of like, okay, what if like, he as Rob McElvaney sets up these initial showrunners and they have their writers' rooms, and each of these showrunners determine like, okay, they're going to tell their stories, they're going to build their stories. And then as a junior sort of showrunner emerges in each of these rooms, those junior showrunners can then spin off and create their own room, right? And then they can fill it with their own writers, and they have a chance to then now become showrunners, right? And then within all of those rooms, junior showrunners emerge, and then they spin off their own thing, right? So I see that as just like this continued fractalization. How can we do this decentralization thing in these like little like intimate spaces as sort of proving grounds for how we might do it at scale? That was a long answer.
There was so much good information there. And I think one overarching takeaway that I had just from listening to you talk about all of that is that there is so much more that goes into thinking about how do we progressively decentralize media than to just think about that decentralized media piece. Because when you want to decentralize media as a function in an organization, you're also talking about, how do we get people to organize in a different way than they have been in the past? And that's something that you were talking about with, trying out you stepping away from the weekly calls with the other contributors and letting them handle it. These are all things that I think are really important for people who work in DAOs to think about. And I think something that people don't think about enough because we're so focused on the work and the task at hand that it's easy to forget about that human element of it. Like we're so focused on like, how do we build out the right tech to let us have permissionless systems and trustless systems and operate in that sort of way, where we forget that we're still human beings on the other side of it, operating all of these things. So I'm curious to hear more about your experience being in Seed Club and being in DAOs in general, drawing from some of your experience with, leadership, with conflict resolution and all of that. And I guess like where I want to start is I saw in one of your blog posts that you included a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown. And the quote is, "People often think they need to take action when they actually need to build relationship." And that just resonated so closely with me thinking about DAOs, because that's exactly what I've seen a lot of people do in DAOs is focus on what is the action that needs to be taken without thinking about the people and the relationships behind that. So I guess like to start, like you obviously included that quote for a reason. I love to hear like what you've experienced or what you've observed in DAOs in terms of that quote and how that quote rings true.
Yeah, I mean, that quote is such an evergreen quote, and Adrienne is such an evergreen mentor for me too. All of my experience in community building, especially within the social and racial justice space, conflict is just so core to what we're doing, because there's a sense that like, yeah, we are in conflict with the like sort of wider like narratives in the world, and how can we bring alignment to those things to like create a more generative experience of the world. And I also think about conflict so much at the intersection of individual relationships, and have just been a student of conflict for a lot of my life. But yeah, I mean, at the intersection of DAOs, like a common thing that I see both in DAOs, but I think just in relationships in general, when there is like a point of tension or point of conflict, what that is a signal of is that there needs to be a clarification of the relationship, that there is a sense of like, okay, you can really extend this analogy to so many things. Conflict is the relationship. Like conflict is it's a sign that there's like transformation at bay, and like there needs to be a clarification of the relationship. And that's just like how you move things forward, right? If you're not feeling challenged or moved or unsure of what to do, I'm just like, okay, you're not taking big enough risks. You're not growing enough. You're not stretching. And so conflict is a really critical thing, especially at the intersection of organizing people. And so I often see that when I find team members or just like people in the DAO are having conflict, there is a sense that there's action, that there's like, okay, to the most extreme, it's like this person needs to be removed, or this thing needs to be removed, or we have to bring in this other thing, or we have to course correct on this thing, and actually what needs to happen is like, no, have you actually connected with that person? Have you actually just like sat down and had a conversation? And I know that sounds so like such a cop out, and it's very different from this idea of like we just need more love, we just need more empathy, because actually those conversations can be really hard, and those conversations don't always result in more empathy, but the place to start is connection. It's just like putting people together. And yeah, and I see this at the intersection of teams too. It's like when there's people on a team who are having conflict, the natural thing they want to do is like go to the person in charge and say, tell us who's right, or like who's to blame here. And like, my favorite response for any of that kind of stuff is like, you guys tell me, like what's happened here? Like what is happening here? And also what's like the core issue here? Like what's the disconnect? What's the miscommunication? What are the assumptions that you're each carrying with you? And then what's the best, most elegant step now? Like, is the next step to work on something together? Why don't you try like putting your creative energies together and seeing what happens? Or actually, it's not good for you two to work on a project together, that it's actually better when there's another person involved, or you pair them up with other folks. And that's really what that statement is it's just like, yeah, again, it's a reminder that sometimes when you just like feel that heat of conflict and you want to like fight or flight or freeze or whatever, it's like the thing that actually you need to do is more connection. Sometimes it's also connection to yourself, like to get really sort of like woo-woo. It's like, yeah, just like, okay, what's going on in here? Like, what's the story that I'm telling myself about this situation that actually, is that story useful? Maybe it's served me or served other people in the past. But yeah, I think, again, like that quote's it's so evergreen.
I love that answer. And I think sort of like when I'm listening to it, it sounds like the hero in that is actually the mediator, the person that can go to the two people in conflict and say, hey, can we talk this out? Can we, like figure out what the actual issue is and how we can resolve it? It's that mediator person. And I think that is maybe where a lot of DAOs find the challenge, is in finding that mediator, because like I think in DAOs, with how decentralized it is, you have people from all over the world. No one really knows each other or like has met each other in real life. And so it's hard to know who to go to when you are feeling like you're engaging in conflict with somebody else. And I don't know what the answer is, whether it's designating a mediator in the DAO to sort of handle these things, or whether it's like everybody has that one person that they can talk to. Most of the time, it's probably the person that onboarded them to the DAO. I don't know what the answer is exactly, but I guess my question for you is, a lot of times when people think about DAOs, they think, oh, there's a completely flat structure, everybody is on equal footing. And sort of what you just highlighted is like, in a very basic example, we do need people that are in charge of certain things. How do you think about leadership and hierarchy, which is like a bad word now and maybe shouldn't be, but how do you think about these things in the context of a DAO?
Yeah, I would actually like push back a little bit too on this idea that we need this like outside mediator, because I think I'm really interested in the way in which we can like tap into the mediator that we all have within us. And it really has to do with that piece of connection too. And also this idea of like doing small conflict reps, like how you move through even the tiniest bit of tension or the tiniest bit of conflict, how you move through that informs how you're going to do it the next time with that person. And I say this on our media team a lot. We once had a full team, like all four of us, like in conflict in our Discord channel. And it got kind of hot for a couple minutes and got kind of tense. And like, I think a lot of us were like, how are we going to get through this? We got to ship this thing like right now. And how are we going to get through it? And we did. And I said to the team is like, yeah, it's really important that we move through in retro these moments of conflict and consider them like little reps for when the inevitable and also the next conflict comes, right? Like there will be bigger and bigger crises. There will be bigger and bigger conflicts. And so how we handle these at each sort of like iterative step is really critical and sets us up for another iteration of it the following time. And then, yeah, I mean, at the intersection of like, DAOs are flat, DAOs have no hierarchy, that is just like, that is just fundamentally not true. Like we are a species that has like utilized hierarchy and power to sense make and to survive. And so it's like such a ingrained thing in us. And I think the thing that does the most disservice to us in DAOs is when we don't acknowledge that. And we don't acknowledge the way power exists and flows, even within this idea that DAOs are flat or DAOs are structureless or have no hierarchy. No, there always is a hierarchy, whether you acknowledge it or not. And in fact, not acknowledging it is more toxic than just saying, yeah, this is what's here. This is who has the most power. This is how power is flowing. And sometimes it changes. Sometimes it changes on the context, or sometimes it's evergreen. It sort of depends. And then, yeah, I mean, at the intersection of leadership, like my idea form of leadership is like, my favorite thing is when like people on my team or just like people in general, just like seeing them win and seeing them grow and seeing them take a risk and then learn from that risk. And within DAOs, and I think about this as I approach my role as steward at C Club too, it's like I have to like give folks the opportunity to like fail well or to fail small, and then to give them the opportunity to then take ownership over that failure, and then to kind of be like, yeah, I'm here, I'll be here to catch you. You know, like if someone comes to me with an idea or someone has an idea, and even if I don't quite see the vision, or maybe I don't even agree with it, if they clearly have conviction and they've demonstrated like, yeah, here's sort of the plan for how this is going to go, I'm just like, okay, great, let's try it on. But then also like own what happens afterward. To me, I'm like, that's where leadership is cultivated. And like, I always want to be trying to make my role like as obsolete as possible, right? That like, I just want everyone else to continue to move up in their leadership and to like be able to take more and more ownership over the work that they do. And the ability to take that ownership requires, you know, creating the conditions for folks to take responsibility for things and to take risks. And that requires a lot of trust, right? And sometimes it doesn't go well. And sometimes it doesn't go well for the person who like put that trust in someone else. You're like, oh, okay, that was too early, like, or I don't know, like maybe this like the chemistry just isn't there or something. Like there's totally risk in that. Yeah, it's just like a really rich like design space, the whole DAO leadership space.
For sure. Yeah. I think there's so many moving pieces there, so many factors, which is true for any kind of, you know, human to human relationship. It's no different in DAOs. And if anything, DAOs just complicates it even more. Okay, cool. So I like to end every podcast episode with a few just fun little questions. I call it a game, but it's not really a game. It's just kind of like fun questions. So I've got 5 questions for you. Some of these are about crypto related things and some aren't. These are questions I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, but the first one is super relevant for you. I'm probably most excited to hear your answer to this. And the question is, you get to rebrand one thing in Web3 and it's guaranteed to stick. What do you rebrand?
Oh my God.
As a former, you know, brand guru like this, I'm super excited to hear your answer.
Oh my God.
No pressure.
This is no pressure. I know, seriously. I'm like, I have to have such a, yeah. Okay. So I would rebrand the whole idea of that like hierarchy and power structures don't exist in DAOs. Like I would rebrand that whole concept. The brand that would emerge would be like something that was like punchy and fun. Yeah. And I think the thing I'm imagining is like, this is totally crazy, but like there's like palm trees, there's like, you know, like fun, cute drinks. There's definitely some like good, like reggaeton playing. Yeah. And we're like here and we're like, yeah, we're going to like vibe this out and we're going to identify the way in which like power is here. Yeah. And we're going to roll with it.
I love that. I think we have to change the whole persona of like the bitchy middle manager that's like always just in a bad mood and there to like mess up your day, or like the dictator boss, you know, that nobody likes working for. So yeah, I'm totally vibing with like the palm trees and the fun cocktails to like sort of change that image. I like
and
that.
Just like, yeah, like, can you imagine like, oh, you need some answers, you need some clarity, like come on in, like let's talk about that clarity, like let's unblock things, like let me leverage my power to help you get what you need, right? Like, yeah. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Let's make it fun.
I like that. I knew you would have a good answer to that one. Okay, second question. If you could wave a magic wand and any Web3 app, tool, or protocol would exist, what would you want that to be?
Oh my God. And any Web3 app, tool, or protocol would exist. Mm-hmm. What would I have? Okay, I would want something that enabled me to like stand up and like co-found creative projects with like cool and weird and interesting people just like over and over again. Like it's almost like a dating app. Yeah, that's what it is actually. It's like a dating app, but it's for like people who you want to like co-found or create something with. And when I say co-found, it's like, you know, like we're going to like co-found and do this like little experiment together, this like little creative experiment. And then, but I'm going to like do it again with another person. We're going to do something different. And like, because I feel like that's the most exciting thing about Web3 for me is like the ability to like be a co-founder over and over and over again in these like smaller chunks. And so I'd want like, yeah, I'd want some sort of app that could like enable that.
You should talk to LDF because that's literally like what she talks about all the time. And I think that's like the number one thing she wants in life.
I know. LDF and I, we are like constantly telegramming about stuff. I should be like, we should just do this.
Yeah, you guys should. I think she would totally be down. She's like always looking for people to like do cool projects with.
Totally.
Okay, next question. If Seed Club were a famous person or animal or character from history or pop culture, who would it be?
Oh my God. If Seed Club were... Okay, I know what it is. And this answer is for Nicole DeVise, who's the co-creator of Seed Club. So Seed Club would be like mycelium, like a rhizomatic network. So like underneath, you know about mycelium, right? Like underneath the trees, there's like a network of, that's what Seed Club would be.
Ah, okay. That's a creative one. I can't say anybody said that before. Okay, next question. If money were no issue, like if you and your family would be financially set for the rest of your lives, what would you be doing?
Honestly, I would probably be doing something pretty similar. I love building. I love taking visions and like manifesting them into existence and iterating. And I really love like team building and like bringing the right people together to like create the thing. And I think actually I would also do a lot more reading and writing. Gosh, if I am like so craving just like a stretch where I can really read and really write. It's been a minute. So I would definitely do a lot more of that too. Like more, I would read more fiction. Like I don't read enough fiction.
Same. I never read any fiction. Like who has the time?
Who has the time?
Right. Okay. And the last question, you do. Last question. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you want to live?
I would want to live in a place that is where I have access to like lake mountain swimming, but also is like, I don't know, like a city-ish of like 40,000 people, like maybe like twice the size of the city that I'm in right now, maybe even a little bit bigger, we might even go to 100,000. But there's a good selection of really good places to eat. And there's like natural wine bars and coffee shops. And like all of my favorite people are there. All my friends are there. And we can like, there's like art openings we can go to. We can like go see movies. We can go see live music. And there's also definitely palm trees. Like I come from like tropical, I have like tropical blood, and I live in upstate New York, and there's just like, there's nothing tropical about where I live right now. And I want there to be, this is like a totally made up place, but
yeah, I was gonna say, you want the mountains and then you want the palm trees in the mountains.
Literally, I want it. Yeah, exactly. I want to be able to like go dive or not go dive, but like go jump into a lake and like do some swimming and like alone. And then also like go hang out under some palm trees and with my friends at a coffee shop. Like that's it.
Yeah. And you want a small city with all your friends and tons of culture and things to do.
Exactly. And lots of dogs. There's like lots of street dogs too.
That is also the ideal place for me to live. And unfortunately, it'll never exist.
We can make it happen. I know we can.
It can exist in the metaverse for sure. We'll build it in the metaverse.
Heart.
Yeah. And in our hearts. That's all that matters. All right. Well, thank you so much, Steph, for coming on the podcast. Last thing before you go, tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you. And also feel free to plug away at anything Seed Club related too. That's relevant right now.
Yeah. So I'm at Crypto Honey on Twitter. That's Crypto HUN3Y. And yeah, give me follow Seed Club. We're at Seed Club HQ on Twitter. Subscribe to our newsletter. We also have a podcast. It's called Building at the Edges with Jess. Should give that a listen. Real big brain stuff. And we have Demo Day coming up. SEO5's Demo Day. Yeah, it's going to be on December 16th. Keep an eye out. We're going to have some pretty exciting alpha to launch there. So yeah. And also like I love talking to people. So DM me.
That was so fast. I feel like SEO5 just started and it's Demo Day already. Wow.
Yeah,
That
it's wild.
Really breezed by. Like you said, it's dog years in crypto. Crypto time
Exactly.
is strange. No one can keep up. Thank you again so much, Steph. We'll include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in as always. And we'll be back again next Thursday with another episode of Rehash.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. Steph Alinsug was nominated by Louie and voted onto the podcast by Karsten, Triumph, and Zaku. Some of the questions you heard were submitted by Karsten. Rehash is hosted by Diana Chen, produced and edited by Ellie Dots and Tyler Internet, sponsored by Lens, Avenue, and Govern, and as always, supported by Rehash DAO. To stay up to date on all things Rehash, you can follow us on Twitter at RehashWeb3, on Lens at rehash.lens, and join our Discord to get involved.